Okay, good afternoon. So today we're looking at Searle's famous argument about the Chinese room, an argument against the possibility of artificial intelligence, as it's usually thought of. There's no lecture on Friday, and on Monday we'll look at an article by Frith that isn't in the textbooks. I'll mail this round and put it on the B-Space resources this afternoon. Okay, so that's no lecture on Friday and Frith on schizophrenia on Monday, when we look at some real-world applications of these ideas. So a lot of the dream in artificial intelligence has traditionally been you want to make a computer that speaks English. You want to make a computer that would be intelligent, and part of that would be understanding an ordinary human language the way ordinary humans do. So how would you know when you'd done it? I mean, if you're an AI guy and your task is get a computer where, as it were, English is the highest level programming language, then when have you won? How would you know when you had a computer that was speaking English? How do you know anyone speaks English? Yes?
We would know that the computer was speaking English when it produced the same result as the person speaking English.
Very good. Did you just do that right now? Yeah, you just invented the Turing Test. Yeah, right. So I think this is just playing back to you what you just said. That if you have the computer behind the screen and the person behind the screen and someone able to chat with both the computer and the person, then you don't know which one's which. You can't tell which is the computer and which is the person. Yeah, is that catching your idea? Yeah. It's a pity you didn't think of that earlier. That is the Turing test for intelligence. Here's Turing saying this: I believe that in about 50 years' time, it will be possible to program computers to make them play the imitation game so well that an average interrogator will not have more than 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes of questioning. I believe at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. That wasn't quite right, the last thing, but you see what he was thinking anyway, and that was in 1950. So that's a good test, right? It's hard to see what better a test you could have for whether a computer is intelligent. Is that right? Is there a better test? Any advance in the last comment? Okay, there's no better test. Well, okay, Searle's point is that test doesn't work. That's an important test because it seems like the only one we have, but the point is it's not going to work. That isn't how you're going to tell. So suppose you just say very abstractly, what is a computer? I mean, what's a computer anyway? Here's Searle. A typical computer rule will determine when a machine is in a certain state, and it has that when a machine is in a certain state and has a certain symbol on its tape, then it will perform a certain operation, such as erasing the symbol or printing another symbol, and then enter into another state, such as moving the tape one square to the left. So this is basically a description of a computer as a Turing machine. Yeah, and is that a familiar structure? Yeah, does anyone recognize this? Suppose the machine is in a certain state. Let us call it state S1. Then what the description of it as a computer says, there's a rule that says that when it's in S1, it's got a certain symbol in its tape, then given a particular input, it'll perform a certain operation, such as when it gets that symbol on its tape as the input, it will perform a certain operation, such as erasing that symbol or printing another symbol. So it'll give a motor output and then enter another state, such as moving the tape one square to the left. So the machine's in a certain state, and then it gets a symbol as input. Then it'll perform a motor output, such as erasing that symbol or producing another symbol, and then go into another state. So you get state S1, you get a sensory input, such as getting a particular symbol. Then what happens next? You get a motor output, and you go into a different state, S2. Do we recognize that? It is nothing but our old friend, functionalism. Yes, the computer model of the mind is a version of functionalism. I won't work through all these examples, but you can see how it goes, right? It's the same structure every time, the same very general abstract structure. So the computer model of the mind is functionalism, together with the idea that symbols are the key to what's going on. That these states can be more precise, more specifically characterized as states involving symbols. It's because you have physical symbols in there that the machine is working the way it does. So it's just a form of functionalism, the computer model of the mind. This is still far and away the most dominant model of the mind. You listen to any lecture in vision science and psychology, for example, and you will find that's the model that's being used. Are there any psychology majors here? Can anyone confirm that? Is the computer model of the mind popular in psychology? Take it from me. The computer model of the mind is popular in psychology. So just to spell that out, when you're asking, you've got all those states, S1, S2, and so on, and you ask, well, why do they work the way they do? The answer that's been given is because they involve signs. Those signs are particular shapes, and it's because the signs are the particular physical characteristics that they do that your states as a thinker are functioning as they do. And that's a familiar idea, really. If someone stands up right now and shouts, "Fire," then that will have a certain impact on everyone. And it's because a particular physical shape was produced. If people rush for the door and getting that, it's because you got that physical sign as input, and then you gave all that motor activity, rushing to the door or whatever it is, as output. And what the computer model is trying to do is to specify all these signs purely physically. You're not allowed to say, and suppose the computer understands the sign. And if you suppose the computer understands the sign, then sure, then that will be enough for an understanding of a language. But that's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to explain what it is to understand signs. So all you need for an understanding of language is to have a whole bunch of shapes. And then, because those shapes have the physical characteristics they do, you move into further states. The symbols in a computer language have no meaning. They have no semantic content. They're not about anything. If you think of a string of zeros and ones in some programming language, they don't mean anything. They don't have it stand for anything. They're specified just in terms of their physical shapes, their formal or syntactical structure. Zeros and ones are just numerals. They don't stand for numbers. So the computer model of the mind at this stage is fairly easy, I think, to see what it is. It's functionalism plus the idea that what makes the box and arrow connections that the functionalist describes is the physical sentences inside the boxes. The whole computer was set up so that those physical sentences will have particular causal characteristics. They'll generate particular other states and the production of further signs. So that's a little bit abstract, but I hope it's recognizable. Plain as day. So the dominant view in psychology in the last 50 years, 60 years, I guess, has been that roughly the brain is a computer, that the physiology of the brain is like the hardware, and the mind is the software of the brain. That's how you understand the mind scientifically. But if Searle's right, this just can't be right. That whole model must be just wrong. So here's a Chinese room objection. Imagine a bunch of computer programmers have written a program that will enable a computer to simulate the understanding of Chinese. So the computer's given a question in Chinese. This is what you're doing. You're thinking, well, the brain is kind of like this. You give me, if I'm a native Chinese speaker, you give me a question in Chinese. That makes me go into a particular physical state and give a particular sign as output. So if I'm given a question, I'm going to look at that physical sign. I'm going to match that against my memory or against my database, and then I'll use that to produce another sign, and I'll go into another state. So that's what's going on with people when they speak a language. That's what's going on with you or me right now when we talk across the class. And then we've got this test. If the computer's answers are as good as those of a native Chinese speaker, then the computer is going to understand Chinese. Because that's all that the native Chinese speaker is doing. That's all your brain is doing. So that's all the computer has to do too. Okay, that's the idea. Both very important ideas. That's the test for whether you're understanding, and that's all that has to be going on inside you. Because what else could be going on inside you? Well, imagine you are locked in a room, and in this room are several baskets full of Chinese symbols. You're given a rule book in English for manipulating these symbols. So Searle is taking it for granted here. Suppose you don't know a word of Chinese. Suppose it's Searle himself who doesn't know, let's suppose, a word of Chinese. Yeah? Searle has nonetheless a certain sensitivity to the language. The rule might say, take the squiggle squiggle sign out of basket number 1 and put it next to a squoggle sign from basket number 2. Well, you see what he means, right? He doesn't know what the sign means. He's just saying that's all there is to say about the shape. So if you, as a native English speaker who don't know any Chinese at all, are looking at the book, it might say something like this. If you see that shape followed by this shape, followed by that shape, then produce those shapes as output. Okay, so that's what you're getting. So here is Searle himself in the Chinese room, speaking only English, surrounded by baskets of Chinese symbols and a huge rule book for manipulating all those symbols. Then, of course, if the rule book is big enough, long enough, accurate enough, he can be outputting answers. If you post him in a question through the mailbox in Chinese, if you as a native speaker of Chinese post him in a question through the mailbox, then you will get back out, a sensible answer. Right? That's okay. You will definitely get a sensible answer back out because the book is really good. In fact, you may not be able to tell whether you are dealing with a guy like this or with a native Chinese speaker. So this whole system is going to pass the Turing test. But does this guy understand any Chinese? This guy does not understand a word of Chinese. He's made no progress at all in an understanding of Chinese. So you have here something that is, in effect, a computer doing everything that an artificial intelligence program could do. Everything that the artificial intelligence program could do is written down in the book. So he's completely simulating the computer. But he doesn't understand anything of what's going on. So if a computer was doing that stuff, it could be doing it all without understanding any Chinese at all. If your brain was doing all that stuff, it could be doing it without you understanding any Chinese at all. So this just can't be what understanding a language involves. The whole computer of the model of the mind is a mistake. The whole AI project is a mistake. The whole of psychology is founded on a mistake. There's no way you could learn any Chinese simply by manipulating these formal symbols. A computer has a syntax. That is, it can recognize the shapes, the physical shapes of the signs it's dealing with, and operate them with accordingly. But no semantics. That's to say, it doesn't know what any of those signs stand for. It doesn't know what would make them true or false. That's the Chinese room objection. Let me put this another way. Let's suppose you've got a calculator. Calculators? You get? In the old days, there used to be calculators, but you get calculators on phones, right? You want to do a sum, okay? So suppose you've got a calculator. Suppose you've got a calculator that can do hard sums, and you say, how is it doing that? Suppose you've got a calculator that can do multiplication, and you say, how does it do the multiplication? Well, how might it do the multiplication? Who? Louder?
It could do it by addition.
By addition, very good. Who said that? Okay, very good, yeah. How can you do multiplication by addition? Isn't that just a mistake?
So if you put in 12 times 3,
Yeah.
12 plus 12 plus 12.
Very good. Okay, I have here one I prepared earlier. So here's a flowchart for how you do multiplication. I suppose you want to multiply, you said 12 by 12. Okay, that's pretty big. So suppose 12 by 3. Okay, let's multiply 12 by 3. 12 by 3. Okay, so I'm trying to find out what the answer is. So over at the left it says, let's make A 0. So let's make A 0. And then we move over here and we say, is N 0? Well, what's N? N is 3, right? So is that 0? No. So if it's not 0, then you subtract 1 from N. So that's 2. And then you add M to A. So M is 12, so I add 12 to A, which is 12 plus 0, which is 12. And then I go back to the start. Oh, let's see. No, wait a minute. Where am I? I go back and I say, is N 0? And I say, no, N is 2. So I subtract 1 from N, and I add 12 to 12, which is 24. I am not a machine. Here we see the superiority of the human to the machine intelligence. 24. Okay. Is N 0? No, N is 1. So I subtract 1 from N, which is 0, and I add 12 to 24, which is 36. And then I say, well, is N 0? Hey, N is 0. So I stop. Hey, look at that. Okay. We just multiplied 12 by 3. Okay, and as you say, we did it by adding. Right? Okay, so that's a computer. Right? A mere machine could do that a bit better, actually. But that's the kind of stuff a computer is doing. That is the formal manipulation with symbols. But now suppose you ask, well, how is it doing the adding? Characteristically, you might get some answer like, well, it does the adding by reducing everything to binary. And then you say, well, how does it do calculations in binary? How do you make a machine that does calculations in binary? Well, what we did here was we took a complex computation and bust it down into simpler computations. But with binary, when you've got an AND gate here, and you've got an OR gate there, an exclusive OR gate there, how do they work? How does the computer do the adding in binary? Okay, you guys gave an answer for the multiplication here. What's the answer here for the binary? How would you do that? How would you bust that down? You can bust down multiplying to adding. How can you bust down adding in binary? Yep?
Like if you have in the first column, you have a 0 and a 1, then you carry down the 1. You have
Yep.
1 and a 1, then you carry over the 1. And you have 0 and 0, then just a 0. And then it just keeps doing that recursively.
That's right. That's exactly what the system is doing. Right? You just described what the system does. Yeah? But I'm asking you a question that might not seem quite intelligible. Namely, how is that done? Multiplication here got broken down into addition. Right? I said, okay, here we've got binary addition. How do you break that down? And my general point is, you can't break that down. This is where it comes to a stop. Because all you've got here are switching circuits. Here you've just got electricity. That's what's so good about binary, that you just got switches that go on or off, on for a 1, off for a 0. Yeah, that's all you need. So wherever you have complex operations, like multiplication, and you say, well, I've got a computer doing this, you've got to, in the end, come down to primitive processors, where they're just doing, they're just realizing the thing without breaking it down into any more primitive computations. If you want to make a gadget that does this, you just need to move to electricity. You just need to make some switches and get some lights that go on or off. That's all you do. Right? Okay? So, if that's right, if the computer model of the brain is right, then when you take any complex computation, if you take your ability to multiply, you can say, well, how does a human multiply? That is the kind of question psychologists study. What strategies do people use when they're trying to multiply two numbers? And you say, well, how do they do that? And one answer might be they do it by addition. But then eventually, you've got to come to primitive processes that can't be broken down any further. So the brain must have primitive processors, like these little electrical switches, right? That's what physiology is. That's what you're doing when you study the physiology of the brain. You're trying to figure out what the basic switching circuits of the brain are. That is how the computer model of the mind gets connected to the physiology of the brain. But if you think what's going on here, all you've got is a bunch of dumb processes, dumb switches flipping on and off in your brain. You've got neurons sparking into action, firing up other neurons. That's all that is going on. So one way to put Searle's point is to say, no amount of that kind of stuff could add up to the system understanding what is going on. In the case of a calculator, you can take these primitive switching circuits and say, okay, I'm going to construct it so that these lights go on when these switches are on, and you're going to get these readouts when these switches are on. You can do that as much as you like. You can make that as complex as you like. And no amount of that will stack up to the calculator understanding what it's doing. So your brain could be made of as complex an array of neurons, of physical processors as you like, but no amount of being orchestrated like that is going to stack up to your understanding of English, to your ordinary understanding of English. How could it? Therefore, the scientific study of the mind, when it's driven by the computer model, must just be a mistake. It's all off on the wrong track. Another way to put it is in terms of Nagel's thing about understanding in bats. That Nagel applied that to consciousness. But if you're thinking about trying to understand what someone's saying, if you're making a point to me and I'm saying, well, wait a minute, let me try and get what you're saying, let me try and understand that, I'm trying to imagine what's going on with you. I'm trying to get inside your head, trying to imagine what you mean by what you're saying. There is no point in trying to do that with the Chinese room. There's no point in trying to get inside this guy's head and imagine what is going on. There is no such thing. There's no head there, no relevant head there to get inside. You can't imagine what this guy means by what he's saying, any more than you can imagine what your calculator means by what by what it's producing. But how else could you approach the scientific study of an understanding of language? Is there some other method you could use? One answer that people sometimes give to this is, well, your brain is kind of like the chip. Your brain, is that right? Your brain is like chips. Your computer's got a chip in it, right? You're the central processor. Your brain is like your central processor. And we would never say the chip itself understands anything. So you might say, well, maybe the computer itself, maybe the whole system understands something. So maybe your brain doesn't understand English, but maybe you do, because your brain is embedded in you, in the whole system. And one way to think of it might be in terms of virtual people, that if you think of this guy's producing answers, this guy, let's suppose, might be the sweetest, most patient guy on the planet. I mean, he'd have to have quite a lot of sweetness and patience to do that stuff, right? But let's suppose that the answers coming out exhibit an irascible, short-tempered personality. They say things like, well, that was a stupid question, or I can't believe that you're supposed to be the intelligent one, and so on, right? You could get any kind of answers at all coming out there, and they might stack up to make a coherent personality. So there's some sense in which you could talk about the whole system here, the whole room, having a virtual personality that is not the same as the personality of the individual in it. Maybe you could say, well, that personality, that's what understands Chinese. What about that? Does that offer hope? Put up your hand if you think that offers hope. And if you think that does not offer hope. And if you don't understand what the question is. Oh boy, okay, right. So let me go back to where we've got to. Okay, so we're trying to give an analysis of what it is to understand English. The computer model says doing this kind of stuff would be enough for you to understand English, but it clearly isn't. Put up your hand if that part's plain as day. Okay, and if you think there's some problem with that. Okay. So then I said, okay, well maybe that's the wrong way to think of it. Maybe after all, there is something here that understands English, because there's a virtual personality here. The personality that's being exhibited by the whole system. It's not the same as the personality of the man actually manipulating the signs. Just as you can talk about what the whole computer does, and that's something different to talking about what the chip does. You could regard this guy as the chip. You could regard your brain as the chip and say that what I can understand, what I can think of, that's different to what my brain can do. So you could say there's a virtual personality here that might be short-tempered or whatever, and it understands English. Is that easier to understand? Put up your hand if you now understand what I'm asking. Uh-huh. Can anyone formulate that puzzlement into a question? Okay. Let me try another way of putting this. It could be that this guy, okay, so this guy is outputting in Chinese. Suppose that he also gets asked questions in Korean. Suppose that this guy does not understand a word of Korean either. He could still be outputting answers in Korean. Yeah? And those answers might fit very well with what a Korean speaker would say. Yeah?
So, is it based on the perception of the person outside who's getting these results that to them from the whole room, it seems like the letter was written by someone who understands?
That's right. That's right. That's the basic test we began with. Yeah, you got this guy and you got a regular Chinese speaker, both behind a screen, and you don't know. And the question is, can you tell which one it is that is generating those answers? Yep. Yep.
I've got a question. So everything happens inside your brain, chemical reaction, right?
Yes.
So chemical reaction is based on rules, right?
Chemical reactions based on rules. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just we don't know it's inside the rules of the real program.
That's right. So if that's your picture of what is going on in the brain, then it's just like what this guy is doing. Yeah.
So for us, it's like when I see an apple, it's just chemical reaction inside my brain.
Right.
Generate the apple image inside. Maybe I want to eat it, so I would tell everyone I want to get an apple. All the thing is just chemical reaction.
That's right.
And there's like in chemistry, there are different rules to
That's right.
describe the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So the rules is just like a book. So it's it.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. But this guy doesn't understand any Chinese or English. I mean, well, actually, you see what I mean. This guy doesn't understand any of the relevant language, Chinese. Yeah? So if what this guy's doing is just like what you're doing, then you don't understand English. Therefore, since you do understand English, there must be more going on in you than just this business of chemical reactions in the brain, governed by rules. Thinking of the human in terms of chemical reactions in the brain governed by rules can't explain what it is to understand a language. That's the argument. Yeah. Because it's such a natural, powerful idea, what you just said. Yeah. It's a dominant scientific idea in approaching the study of the mind. But this seems to show it just can't be right. Yep, yep.
So, furthermore, we're saying that the mind cannot be a computer because it's able to attach meaning to symbols and not just manipulate symbols.
Exactly, that's right.
Right, but then what about this concept of attaching meaning? Like, where did it come from? How did we develop the ability to attach meaning?
Yes.
And I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I would guess that one of the ways that we developed this ability to attach meaning is through experience.
Very good, yes.
And so, furthermore, building on that, experience is one of those things where, as you grow older, you go through things, and through trial and error, and through actually doing, you are able to gain experience and then understand what your subjective feeling is.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
So then, couldn't you argue that with enough of this doing, a computer could also develop an inventory of meanings and then somehow
Yeah.
attach that to meaning?
That's a really powerful idea, yeah. But couldn't you do something like that with this system? Suppose you could make this teaching in the sense that sometimes when he puts sentences out, you give him an error message, yeah. So you put back in a big cross or something. You say, "No, think about that again," and he has to try again in putting out some other set of symbols, yeah. Or maybe the book gets modified, yeah. But so maybe he modifies the book when he gets error reactions, yeah. But he could be doing that forever, really modifying the book in response to error reactions. Maybe he just has to trial and error his responses until the people on the other side send him a tick. And then he says, okay, so that's the book. Yeah. If that's what learning from experience is, it seems like you could do a lot of it without ever understanding a word of what's going on. You see what I mean? Nonetheless, what you're saying is powerful. It's just that you have to be very explicit about what you mean by learning from experience. Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit like Nagel's thing, in the sense that if you look at the bat scientifically, you still don't know anything about what it's conscious of, what its conscious life is. It's a bit like Bloch's thing, in that if you look at the homunculus-headed robot, if you look at this robot with 1 billion people in it, then you could understand what that whole system is doing, but there's no mental life for you to understand. And here the point is, if you understand the human brain as a computer, you still know nothing about how it's understanding its language. It's another of that same family of arguments that is showing that looking at the mind objectively seems to be missing something out, missing all the key things out. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I have a question. So, if this guy is inside there, he's hungry. So,
If this guy, what? Sorry.
He's hungry.
Yep.
So he wants to get food, right? So if you're hungry, you search the book and then you got a page like, if you're hungry, just put out these few words.
Yes.
So in this way, he can learn that hungry in that these few words.
That's great.
So it's how we learn language, right?
That's great. Okay. Okay. I strongly agree, actually. What this guy's missing is connecting it up to stuff like hunger. Yeah? So you could say, well, how are you going to do that? Well, it could be that if he's hungry, that's got to generate, if there's hunger here, that's got to generate some symbols. Yeah? But that's not what you want. What you want is for him to be experiencing the hunger and therefore knowing which symbols to generate. Yeah? So there's got to be a real thing here, that's a real experience here that he's able to connect to the symbols.
That's for the computers. If it's like
Yeah.
low on battery, right? He will pull out a sign that I'm low on battery. So it's kind of like what?
Right, very good. This is the really delicate thing. This is the really important thing. What was the computer low on? The computer was low on printering?
Low on battery.
Battery, right, yeah. Okay, that's very good. Okay, so there are two ways to think about this. You got the computer low on battery, right? So over here we have the battery. Okay? And that really is low. So when the battery is low, that outputs a symbol. Let's say, suppose that's something like that. It outputs a symbol to the computer. And then the computer outputs a symbol, right? When you feel hungry, one way of thinking about it is that your stomach outputs a symbol to the brain, yeah? And then the brain responds to that. Now, if you think of the whole system like that this guy could have, you could easily put a battery over there, yeah? This guy doesn't need to see the battery. It's just that when the battery's low, it outputs a symbol like that. And then he gets a symbol, and he looks in the book and it says, in that case, output a squoggle, and off he goes. Yeah? But that's not, so that really is something a computer can do. But that's not what you're thinking. You're thinking there's a feeling of being hungry. There's that raw feeling itself, the conscious state. And the guy's got to feel that and then output the sign because that's what he's feeling. That's what you want, not just to get a random sign that he doesn't know what it stands for.
But because in here you just separate the battery from the computer, right?
That's right.
So, but here, if we separate the brain and the stomach, it's just like the stomach is the computer.
That's right. Well, this is the delicate thing. Either you separate them, in which case you get something that the computer model can easily explain, can easily characterize. And then that's fine. I can run that too. That just goes in here. And the whole system is still no closer to understanding what's going on than it was before. Or else you say, no, it's the raw feeling. That's what he's got to be responding to, not just a symbol. And I think that's right. I think you're right about that. And that connects to that previous question about experience. But it's when you hook up the signs to experience that you get an understanding of meaning. What this guy is missing is awareness of his environment. He's not conscious of anything going on around. That was that question about apples. Yeah, that intuitively what you'd like to do is take the experience of an apple or the feeling of hunger and hook up the signs of your language to all those conscious experiences of yours. Use this sign to stand for hunger. You know what hunger is because you feel it. Use that sign to stand for apple. You know what apples are because you've experienced them. You've seen them. Yeah. But the computer model of the mind, that just can't do that. I mean, if you said to one of these AI guys, look, it's not that hard to make a computer that understands English. All you have to do is, first of all, make a computer that feels hunger, sees apples, then stack in the symbols, and you're up and running. But how do you make a computer that feels hunger? You can't make a computer that feels hunger. You can't make a computer that has the experience of seeing an apple. That's as hard as the original problem. How would you do that? The best you could do would be to do this kind of thing. produce a computer that, in response to some stimulus from the battery or from the external environment, generates a symbol. Not the experience of seeing an apple or the experience of hunger. It just generates a symbol, and then it manipulates with that. But how could that, the basic question then still remains, how could that add up to understanding? Because when you think about how we understand English, we do it by experiencing our environment and then using signs for the things we experience. An understanding of language depends on consciousness. But if you said to a computer guy, it's easy to understand how to build a computer that speaks a language. First of all, make a computer that's conscious. Then, once you've done that, just make a program like this. But making a computer that's conscious is not... That's usually regarded as about the hardest unsolved problem in science at the moment. How could you do that? The computer model wouldn't be giving us any analysis of what consciousness is. It would just be using consciousness as something to build on. But what we want to understand is, in the objective world, what phenomenon is consciousness? But that was where we began when we were talking about Nagel. Any last comments, questions on that? Okay, well, so there's no lecture on Friday, and on Monday we'll come back to look more optimistically at science, and we'll look at how scientific approaches to the mind are genuinely illuminating in many cases. Okay, thanks guys.